biosecurity, it's important to New Zealand because it protects all our natural resources. And I'm here in Wellington with Eugene, who works for the Ministry for Primary Industries. Now, Eugene, you work with biosecurity. Tell us a little bit about your job.
I'm a marine biosecurity analyst, so my job is to basically determine the biosecurity risk of goods coming into New Zealand. That can be ballast water is classed as a good, biofouling, the animals and plants that grow on vessel hulls is classed as a risk good, but it also encompasses ornamental fish as well. I also work with the aquaculture industry to strengthen their biosecurity practices as well.
Why is it so important that we protect that environment?
Well, New Zealand's marine environment is an incredible natural resource. 80% of New Zealand's native species actually occur in the oceans, and more than half of those only occur in New Zealand. So that in itself is worth protecting. In terms of economics and industry, our aquaculture industry is worth about $500 million a year. There's nothing better than in the Kiwi summer and going to the beach, and the majority of New Zealanders live like within 50 kilometres of a beach. So that's a resource worth protecting. Protecting that Kiwi summer lifestyle, the fishing, the beach going. Our Indigenous population, the Maori, obviously the sea to them is a treasure, and it's an important part of their cultural and spiritual mythology. So again, all great reasons for protecting the marine environment.
And there's some legislation, the Biosecurity Act. How does that protect the marine environment?
Of course, there's always going to be some risk involved with goods coming into the country. The Act is basically to minimise those risks, and it basically allows people within the ministry to enforce risk management action.
So you mentioned before biofouling. What is biofouling? Right,
biofouling is basically plants and animals growing on the underwater surfaces of vessels. And it's a pretty important pathway for the entry of non-Indigenous species into New Zealand. We have, unfortunately, around 200 odd non-Indigenous species in our marine environment, and the majority of those can be traced back to the biofouling pathway. So it's a pretty important pathway, and a pathway that we're trying to manage in New Zealand.
What are some of the ways that you're managing it?
Well, back in the mid-2000s, we didn't know how big a problem biofouling was. So we did a whole lot of research and sampled a whole lot of vessels and found that biofouling wasn't related to a particular class of vessels. It was basically related to each individual vessel's operating profile. And you could analyse the risk of those vessels based on how old their anti-fouling paint was, and also how long those vessels were spending their time idle in ports and marinas. So the longer a vessel spends idle, the more chance that a plant or an animal is going to grow on that submerged surface of the hull. So from all that research and some of the research that was going on overseas, we basically came up with a risk analysis and found out that yes, biofouling is a risk to all the natural resources that we're trying to protect. And from there, we've come up with the world's first standard to protect our values from the risk associated with vessel biofouling. So, and this standard comes into place next year, and it basically means that vessels have to come into New Zealand with clean hulls.
So biosecurity, very important for those reasons that you've outlined, but for the general public and for school students, why is it something worth knowing about?
Well, why wouldn't you want to protect these natural resources? Why wouldn't you want to protect our industries, our marine-based industries? New Zealand has a world-class marine surveillance program, but we always need more eyes on the water, and this is why we try and engage with teachers and school children, recreational divers, snorkelers, pretty much anyone who's out on the water, to keep their eye out for non-Indigenous species. So we produce pest ID guides for species that we don't have here, and we try and teach people the difference between things that we don't want here and plants and animals that are native to New Zealand, so people aren't taking out the wrong, taking out native species instead of ringing us with non-Indigenous species sightings. And the earlier we can get a hold of a non-Indigenous species, the more chance we have of eradicating or actually responding to that non-Indigenous species. Once something is established in the marine environment, it's very difficult to eradicate it. But we need eyes on the beach, and that's what the public can help us out with.
Thanks, Eugene.
Not a problem.